After that night, she got pregnant with triplets from a CEO, only to discover he already had a wife. Hi, my very beautiful and loyal family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Before we begin, let's take a moment to center our hearts with this short, powerful prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the gift of this beautiful family listening right now. Wrap them in your love, guide their steps, and lift every heavy burden from their hearts. Let their homes be filled with laughter, their minds with peace, and their lives with purpose. Bless them in ways only you can. Amen. And to my amazing family, if my story touches your heart, and if it makes you feel something deep inside, then like it. Not because I asked you to, but because your heart responded to it. I will never force you, because forcing would mean I don't believe in what I create, and I do, fully, passionately, completely. Are you present with me? Then take a deep breath, let your soul relax. Let's begin the story. Tallulah Cosima pressed her aching back against the wall of the service elevator, stealing a moment's respite before it reached the penthouse level of the Grand Riviera Hotel. Her fingers, raw from hours of scrubbing, clutched the cleaning cart handle as she exhaled slowly, attempting to ease the tension in her shoulders. At 26, she felt decades older, worn down by the constant struggle of working 3 jobs to keep herself afloat in a city that seemed determined to drown her. "Just get through tonight," she whispered to herself, a mantra repeated too many times to count. Just this shift, then home. The elevator chimed softly, announcing her arrival to the exclusive top floor, a world she entered daily but never truly belonged to. As the doors slid open, Tallulah straightened her shoulders and arranged her features into the pleasant, unobtrusive mask expected of hotel staff. She maneuvered her cart into the plush corridor, the thick carpet muffling the rattling wheels. As she moved toward her assigned suites, the corridor was empty, as it usually was at this hour. Most guests were out enjoying their evening, dining at expensive restaurants or attending high society events. It was easier this way. No awkward encounters, no one to make her feel invisible. Tallulah preferred to work in silence, imagining stories about the lives of those whose messes she cleaned up. It made the hours pass more quickly. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the man rounding the corner until the collision was inevitable. Her cart slammed into something solid, followed by a masculine grunt of surprise. Bottles of cleaning solution toppled over with a series of plastic thuds as she stumbled backward. "I'm so sorry," Tallulah gasped, mortification heating her cheeks as she looked up and up into the most striking face she had ever seen. The man before her was tall, with an imposing build softened by the obvious quality of his tailored charcoal suit. His skin was a warm olive tone, his jaw strong and dusted with perfectly maintained stubble. But it was his eyes that froze Tallulah in place, deep amber, almost golden in the hallway's soft lighting. They regarded her with initial surprise that quickly transformed into something else, something that made her pulse quicken. "Entirely my fault," he said, his voice a rich baritone that seemed to vibrate through her. "I was distracted and not watching where I was going." His accent was subtle but distinctive, cultured and slightly European, though Tallulah couldn't place it. Exactly. What she could place was the aura of wealth and power that surrounded him like a force field, marking him as someone who moved through life unopposed. Someone who belonged in this corridor in a way she never would. "No, please, I should have been more careful," she insisted, dropping to her knees to retrieve the fallen bottles, desperate to end the encounter before she could be reported. Another complaint would mean termination, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. "I'll be out of your way immediately, sir." Instead of continuing past her, the man knelt down beside her, his expensive suit pants pressing against the carpet she had vacuumed just hours before. "Let me help," he said, reaching for a bottle of glass cleaner before she could protest. His fingers brushed against hers as they both reached for the same item. sending an unexpected jolt of electricity up her arm. Tallulah jerked back instinctively, her eyes meeting his again. The amusement in his gaze suggested he had felt it too. "I'm Vesper," he said, offering the bottle to her with a small smile that transformed his serious face into something devastatingly handsome. Vesper Calix. She hesitated before accepting both the bottle and the introduction. "Tallulah," she replied, purposely omitting her last name. Staff weren't supposed to become familiar with guests. "I really am sorry about the collision." "Tallulah," he repeated, as though savoring the syllables. Beautiful name for a beautiful woman. She felt heat rising from her neck to her cheeks at the blatant compliment. Guests occasionally flirted with staff, usually older men who saw the female employees as convenient entertainment, but something about the way Vesper looked at her seemed different. There was genuine appreciation in his gaze, not the entitled leering she'd grown accustomed to deflecting. "Thank you, but I should really get back to work," she said, rising to her feet and straightening her uniform. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. Calix." "Actually," he said, standing with a fluid grace that belied his powerful frame, "I was hoping you might help me with something." Alarm bells rang in Tallulah's mind, her body tensing slightly. She'd heard lines like this before, and they rarely led anywhere professional. Vesper must have noticed her wariness because he quickly added, "The tablet in my room isn't working, and I need to check some important information. Could you possibly take a look or send someone who can?" Relief washed through her, followed by embarrassment at her assumption. "Of course. I can call maintenance for you, or I can take a look myself. I'm pretty good with technology." The smile that spread across his face made something flutter in her stomach. "I'd appreciate your help if you don't mind. I'm in suite 1242. Tallulah nodded, following him down the corridor with her cart. As they walked, she became acutely aware of her appearance. The plain uniform that did nothing for her curves, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, the minimal makeup she'd applied 14 hours ago. Next to Vesper's polished perfection, she felt shabby and out of place. Inside his suite, Tallulah was struck by the contrast between the opulent surroundings and the simple technical issue. The tablet merely needed to be reset, a task that took her less than a minute to complete. As she handed it back to him, she expected a brief thank you before being dismissed. Instead, Vesper looked at her with undisguised interest. "You fixed it immediately. I've been struggling with that for half an hour." Tallulah smiled genuinely for the first time. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the hardest to see." "A philosopher as well as a tech expert," he commented, leaning against the desk with casual elegance. "You're full of surprises, Tallulah." "Hardly," she replied, moving toward the door. "Just practical experience." "Would you have dinner with me?" The question stopped her in her tracks. She turned slowly, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me?" "Dinner," he repeated, straightening up. "I was about to order room service, and I hate eating alone, unless you're finished with your shift soon and have other plans." Tallulah knew she should refuse. Fraternizing with guests was strongly discouraged, and someone like Vesper Calix was so far out of her league that the invitation seemed almost cruel. And yet something in those amber eyes made her want to say yes, to step outside her careful routine for once. "I'm on shift for another hour," she said, surprising herself. His smile was instantaneous and transformative. "Perfect, I'll order. For us. And you can join me when you're done. No pressure, just dinner and conversation." "I shouldn't," she began, but the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "Consider it my thanks for fixing the tablet and for not reporting me for nearly running you down in the hallway," he countered smoothly. A small laugh escaped her. "I'm pretty sure I ran into you, not the other way around." "Then we'll call it even." His eyes held hers, and in them, Tallulah saw something that made her pulse race. Genuine interest, yes, but also respect. He wasn't looking at the hotel maid. He was looking at her. Against every rational thought, Tallulah nodded. 1 hour, just dinner. As she pushed her cart back into the corridor, closing the door behind her, Tallulah couldn't shake the feeling that she had just agreed to far more than a single meal. Something about Vesper Calix called to her on a level she'd never experienced before. A magnetic pull that both thrilled and terrified her. What she didn't know, as she hurried to complete her remaining tasks with a newfound energy, was that this chance encounter would change the course of her life forever. In just 60 minutes, she would step back through that door and into a passion that would consume them both, setting fire to every carefully constructed boundary she had built around her heart. Chapter 2. Whirlwind. Romance. Tallulah stood outside, sweet 12:42, her heart thrumming against her ribs like a caged bird. She had changed out of her uniform into the only decent outfit she kept in her locker, a simple emerald dress that hugged her curves and made her dark skin glow. Her hair, freed from its practical bun, now fell in natural coils around her shoulders, framing her face in a way that softened her usually guarded expression. Her finger hovered over the door, hesitation battling with desire. She could still walk away, return to her small apartment, and pretend this moment of madness had never happened. It would be the sensible choice, the safe choice. But when had safety ever brought her joy? Before she could reconsider, she knocked. The sound surprisingly confident despite her inner turmoil. The door opened almost immediately, as though Vesper had been waiting just on the other side. The sight of him, now dressed in dark trousers and a crisp white shirt open at the collar, sent a fresh wave of butterflies through her stomach. His eyes widened slightly as they took her in, an appreciation so genuine it felt like a caress. "You came," he said, his voice lower, more intimate than before. "I said I would." Tallulah lifted her chin slightly, determined not to appear as nervous as she felt. "Many say things they don't mean." Vesper stepped aside to let her enter. "I'm glad. You're not one of them." The suite had been transformed in the hour since she'd left. The lights were dimmed, casting a warm glow over the sitting area where a table had been set for two. The scent of delicious food mingled with the subtle fragrance of fresh flowers that now adorned the center of the table. She searched for a word that wouldn't reveal how out of her depth she felt. "Lovely." "Too much?" Vesper asked, a hint of uncertainty breaking through his confident demeanor. The question surprised her, this glimpse of vulnerability from a man who seemed to embody self-assurance. Tallulah found herself smiling, some of her nervousness fading. "No," she admitted. "It's perfect." Dinner was unlike any Tallulah had experienced before. The food, a selection of dishes she had only seen prepared by chefs on cooking shows, was exquisite, but it was the conversation that truly captivated her. Vesper listened when she spoke, actually listened, asking questions that showed genuine interest in her answers. With each passing moment, the disparity in their station seemed to fade, replaced by a connection that transcended social boundaries. "So," he said, refilling her wine glass, "3 jobs and night classes. When do you sleep?" Tallulah laughed softly. "Sleep is overrated when you have dreams to chase." "And what are those dreams, Tallulah Cosima?" His amber eyes held hers across the candlelight. The use of her full name sent a shiver down her spine. She hadn't told him her last name, which meant he'd gone to the trouble of finding out more about her. The thought was both flattering and slightly unnerving. "How did you know my last name?" she countered, avoiding his question. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I may have asked at the front desk. I hope you don't mind." "Depends on what. Else you asked about? Nothing invasive, I assure you." He leaned forward slightly. "Just your name. I wanted to know who I was having dinner with." There was something in his gaze that made her believe him, a sincerity that cut through her natural skepticism. Against her better judgment, Tallulah found herself opening up, sharing the dreams she usually kept hidden. Her passion for design, her hope of one day creating spaces that transformed how people felt, how they lived. 1,000 small decisions that change everything, she explained, animated by the subject. The way light falls, how textures complement each other, the flow of a room. It all affects us, even when we don't realize it. Vesper watched her with rapt attention, his expression softening as she spoke. "You see the world differently," he observed. "You see the possibilities others miss." The compliment, offered without artifice, warmed her from within. For a moment, Tallulah allowed herself to believe that perhaps in this man's eyes, she wasn't just a hotel maid, but someone with value, someone worthy of being seen. As the evening progressed, they moved to the balcony with their wine. The city lights spread before them like scattered stars. Standing side by side, Tallulah became acutely aware of Vesper's proximity, the heat of his body just inches from hers. "How long are you staying in the city?" she asked, desperate to break the tension building between them. "I was supposed to." "Leave tomorrow," he replied, turning to face her. The moonlight caught the angles of his face, highlighting his strong jawline and the unexpected tenderness in his eyes. "But I'm thinking of extending my stay." "Because of tablet problems," she teased, trying to lighten the moment. His smile was slow, deliberate. "Because I found something far more interesting than my original plans." Tallulah's breath caught in her throat as Vesper's hand gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. The simple touch sent electricity coursing through her body, igniting a desire she had never experienced with such intensity. "I should go," she whispered, though every cell in her body screamed for her to stay. "Should you?" His question hung in the air between them, an invitation rather than a challenge. When his lips finally met hers, Tallulah understood what poets had been writing about for centuries. The kiss was gentle at first, a question asked and answered, before deepening into something that consumed them both. His hands cradled her face with surprising tenderness, as though she were something precious, something to be cherished. Tallulah lost herself in the sensation, in the taste of him, in the way her body seemed to melt against his, as though they had been designed for this very moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she knew with absolute certainty that everything had changed. "Stay," Vesper whispered against her lips, the word both a request and a promise. What followed was a week of pure enchantment. Vesper extended his stay indefinitely, rearranging his schedule to spend every possible moment with Tallulah. They explored the city together, Vesper showing her places she had lived near, but never experienced. Hidden gardens, exclusive viewpoints, restaurants where chefs prepared meals specially for them. In the evenings, they would return to his suite, where their bodies spoke a language more eloquent than words. Vesper's touch awakened sensations Tallulah had never known possible, his hands and lips mapping her body with reverent attention. In his arms, she felt beautiful, desired, worthy of the passion that flared between them with increasing intensity. During the day, Tallulah continued her shifts at the hotel, though now with a secret that made her smile when no one was looking. Vesper would sometimes appear unexpectedly, pulling her into empty rooms for stolen kisses that left her dizzy with desire and struggling to maintain her professional composure afterward. On the 10th night, Vesper took her to the hotel's rooftop, a garden, closed to the public but mysteriously accessible with a key card he produced from his pocket. Under a blanket of stars, with the city humming far below them, he presented her with a small velvet box. Tallulah's heart stuttered as she opened it to reveal a delicate silver bracelet, adorned with a single charm in the shape of a key. "What's this for?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vesper took the bracelet from the box, fastening it around her wrist with careful fingers. To remind you that you've unlocked something in me I didn't know existed. The simplicity of his words, the raw emotion behind them, brought tears to Tallulah's eyes. No man had ever spoken to her this way, had ever looked at her as though she were the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. Vesper, She faltered, uncertain how to express the storm of emotions within her. He silenced her with a kiss that spoke volumes, his arms encircling her waist and drawing her against him. When they parted, his amber eyes searched hers, ablaze with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. I know it's fast, he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. I know it defies logic, but I've never felt this way about anyone, Tallulah. I don't want this to end. Neither do I, she admitted, allowing herself to be honest, to be vulnerable in a way she had always avoided. That night, in his suite, their lovemaking took on a new dimension, slower, deeper, charged with emotions. Neither was ready to name, but both felt with searing clarity. As dawn broke over the city, Tallulah lay in Vesper's arms, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady rhythm of his heart. I have to leave for a while, he said softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Family. Matters I can't postpone any longer. Tallulah felt a chill despite the warmth of his embrace. When? Tomorrow. His arms tightened around her, as though trying to memorize the feel of her body against his. But I'll be back as soon as I can. A month at most. She nodded against his chest, fighting the irrational sense of loss already creeping through her. 1 month. She could wait 1 month for this feeling, this man who had crashed into her life and changed everything. What she didn't know, as she drifted to sleep in his arms, was that when Vesper returned to her life, it would be under circumstances neither of them could have imagined, circumstances that would test the fragile bond they had formed in these enchanted days and nights. And the next time they met, nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 3. Unexpected news. 3 months. 92 days of silence since Vesper had walked out of her life with promises of returning within weeks. Tallulah stared at her phone for the 100th time that day, willing it to ring, to chime with a message, to give her any sign that the magical 2 weeks they had shared hadn't been just a beautiful dream. Every attempt to contact him had failed. Messages unreturned, calls unanswered, emails seemingly vanished into the digital void. Her tiny apartment seemed emptier now, the walls closer, the ceiling lower. How strange that after knowing someone for such a brief time, their absence could leave such a gaping void. She ran her fingers absently over the silver bracelet on her wrist, the only tangible proof that Vesper Calix had been real, that he had held her, kissed her, whispered promises against her skin in the darkness. Stop it, she muttered to herself, pushing away from the kitchen counter where bills were stacked in precarious piles. He's not coming back. The words hurt, but Tallulah had learned long ago that pain was preferable to false hope. Whatever family emergency had called Vesper away had clearly been more significant than he'd let on, or perhaps there had been no emergency at all. Just a convenient excuse to end what had only ever been a vacation fling for him. A wave of nausea rolled through her, sudden and violent, forcing her to grip the edge of the counter. Not again. This was the 3rd morning this week she'd felt this way. Between the nausea, the bone-deep fatigue, and the strange food aversions that had her gagging at the smell of her once-beloved coffee, Tallulah had finally done what she'd been avoiding for weeks. She'd made a doctor's appointment. The waiting room of the community clinic was crowded, the air heavy with the mingled sense of antiseptic, cheap perfume, and anxiety. Tallulah sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to ignore the churning in her stomach and the persistent thought that kept surfacing despite her attempts to suppress it. Tallulah Cosima? A nurse appeared at the door, clipboard in hand. The examination was brief, clinical, Blood drawn, questions answered in a voice that sounded distant even to her own ears. Yes, she'd been sexually active. No, they hadn't always used protection. Yes, her period was late, very late. Dr. Reynolds, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, returned to the examination room with a file in hand and an expression Tallulah couldn't quite read. Well, Ms. Cosima, your intuition was correct. You're pregnant? Even though she had suspected it, hearing the words spoken aloud hit Tallulah like a physical blow. Pregnant. A life growing inside her. Vespa's child. How far along? She managed to ask, her voice barely audible. Based on your last period and hormone levels, approximately 12 weeks. 12 weeks. Which meant conception had occurred during those final, passionate days with Vespa, when they'd been so consumed by each other that caution had been forgotten in the heat of desire. I'd like to do an ultrasound today, if that's all right with you, Dr. Reynolds continued. Given how far along you are, we should be able to get a good look at the baby. Tallulah nodded numbly, allowing herself to be led to another room, to be positioned on another table. The gel was cold against her still flat stomach, the pressure of the ultrasound wand uncomfortable but not painful. Dr. Reynolds was quiet as she moved the wand, her eyes fixed on the screen that Tallulah couldn't bring herself to look at. The silence stretched, became weighted, until Tallulah felt compelled to break it. Is something wrong? The doctor's expression shifted, not to concern as Tallulah had feared, but to something that looked oddly like surprise. Miss Cosima, she said slowly, turning the screen so that Tallulah could see it. There's nothing wrong, but I do have some unexpected news. On the screen, Tallulah could make out shapes, movement, the rapid flutter of what she knew must be a heartbeat. But something about the doctor's tone made her pulse quicken with apprehension. You're not having a baby, Ms. Cosima. You're having a 3. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Tallulah stared at the screen in disbelief. 3, as in triplets? Dr. Reynolds nodded, pointing to the screen. Here, here, and here. 3 separate amniotic sacs, 3 healthy fetuses. Identical? It's too early to tell for certain. But from what I can see, it's possible they're fraternal triplets, each developed from a separate egg. Triplets. The word echoed in Tallulah's mind, impossible to fully comprehend. One baby had seemed overwhelming enough, a seismic shift in her carefully structured life. But 3? How? Could she possibly manage? Her tiny apartment, her multiple jobs, her night classes, none of it was compatible with motherhood, let alone motherhood times 3. And yet, as she stared at the screen, at the 3 distinct shapes moving within her, something shifted inside Tallulah's heart. These weren't abstract concepts or problems to be solved. These were her children, hers and Vespa's. Would you like me to print some images for you? Dr. Reynolds asked gently. Tallulah nodded, tears blurring her vision as the doctor pressed a button, preserving this moment. This first glimpse of her unexpected future. The walk home from the clinic seemed both endless and too short. Tallulah's mind raced with calculations, with plans immediately discarded as impractical, with fears that threatened to overwhelm her completely. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach, still flat, but now holding a secret. 3 secrets that would soon be impossible to hide. Inside her apartment, she moved automatically to the stack of bills on the counter. Rent due in 2 weeks, electricity already past due, student loan payments temporarily deferred but accruing interest daily. And now, the added expenses of prenatal care, of preparing for not 1, but 3 babies who would arrive in approximately 6 months. The impossibility of it all crashed over her like a wave, driving her to her knees in the middle of her tiny kitchen. Sobs tore from her throat as she finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. Alone, pregnant with triplets, abandoned by the man who had swept into her life and changed it irrevocably. But beneath the fear and despair, something else stirred, a fierce primal protectiveness. These children, created in moments of genuine passion and connection, deserved everything she could give them. They deserved a mother who would fight for them, who would find a way forward no matter how impossible it seemed. Wiping her tears with determined hands, Tallulah rose from the floor and moved to her laptop. First things first, she needed to find Vesper. Whatever had kept him away, whatever had prevented him from contacting her as promised, he deserved to know about his children, and they deserved to know their father if he was willing to be part of their lives. The search proved more difficult than she had anticipated. Vesper Calix seemed to exist in shadows, mentioned occasionally in business publications, but without personal details. His online presence minimal and carefully curated. The most recent article she could find mentioned his return from extended international travel, but nothing about his current whereabouts or how to contact him. With no other options, Tallulah called the Grand Riviera Hotel, where they had met. Perhaps they had contact information for him, some way to pass along a message. "I'm sorry, miss, but we cannot provide personal information about our guests," the receptionist informed her, voice professionally distant. "However, I can take a message if Mr. Calix should stay with us again." Tallulah hesitated, unsure what message could possibly convey everything that needed to be said. "Please just tell him Tallulah Cosima needs to speak with him urgently. He has my number." The words felt painfully inadequate, but they were all she could offer through this impersonal channel. As she hung up, a new wave of exhaustion washed over her. The pregnancy was already taking its toll on her body, the fatigue more intense than anything she had experienced before. She moved to her bedroom, really just an alcove separated from the main living space by a curtain, and lay down on her narrow bed. 3 babies. The thought still seemed surreal, impossible to fully comprehend. Unconsciously, her hand drifted to her stomach again, resting over the place where her children grew, oblivious to the turmoil their existence had created. "I don't know how we're going to do this," she whispered to them, "but we will. Somehow we'll figure it out." Sleep claimed her eventually, deep and dreamless. When she woke, darkness had fallen outside her small window, and something had shifted. Inside her, a resolve that hadn't been there before. With or without Vesper, she would find a way forward. She would create a life for these children, would give them the security and love she had never known in her own chaotic childhood. First step, more income. Tallulah reached for her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found the number. For her former design professor, the woman had offered her freelance work before, small projects for friends and family who needed help with interior spaces but couldn't afford professional rates. Tallulah had always declined, too busy with her regular jobs and classes to take on additional work. Now, she couldn't afford to turn any opportunity away. "Professor Winters, it's Tallulah Cosima, about that freelance work you mentioned." By morning, she had lined up 2 small design projects that could be completed remotely. By the end of the week, she had arranged for additional hours at the Iazia Hotel, taking on administrative work that was less physically demanding than her cleaning shifts. Each step was small, incremental, but together they formed the beginnings of a path forward. The one thing she couldn't seem to make progress on was contacting Vesper. Each attempt led to dead ends, emails unanswered, messages at the hotel apparently, never delivered. It was as though he had vanished completely, or worse, was deliberately avoiding any connection to the brief affair that had meant everything to her, and perhaps nothing to him. As her second trimester progressed, Tallulah's body began to change more rapidly than she had expected. The 3 babies growing within her demanded space, nutrition, energy. Her once flat stomach now curved noticeably, forcing her to invest in maternity clothes far earlier than she would have with a single pregnancy. "Triplets!" her doctor exclaimed at each visit, shaking her head with a mixture of concern and admiration. You're doing remarkably well, but we need to monitor you closely. Multiple pregnancies come with additional risks." Tallulah absorbed the information, the warnings, the advice, adding them to the growing mental list of things she needed to manage, to remember, to prepare for. At night, alone in her bed, she would talk to her babies, telling them about their father, the good parts, the parts that had made her fall for him so completely in such a short time. They deserved that much, at least. To know they had been created in love, even if that love had proven as ephemeral as morning mist. And sometimes, in the quiet darkness, she would allow herself to imagine a different scenario. One where Vesper returned, where he embraced the news of his children with joy rather than obligation or worse, rejection. But those daydreams were dangerous, feeding a hope she couldn't afford to nurture. "We don't need him," she would tell her growing belly afterward, as much to convince herself as her unborn children. "We'll be fine on our own." But as she approached the 5-month mark, with her body changing daily and the reality of 3 newborns looming closer, even Tallulah's fierce determination wavered in the face of practical realities. Her savings were minimal, her health insurance barely adequate, her support system non-existent. The tightrope she was walking grew thinner by the day, the abyss below deeper and more threatening. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that across the city, in a sleek high-rise office, Vesper Calix was finally receiving a message that had been buried under layers of corporate gatekeeping. A message that would bring him rushing back into her life just when she had given up hope of ever seeing him again. And when he discovered the truth about Tallulah's pregnancy, nothing would ever be the same for either of them. Chapter 4. Shocking discovery. The waiting room of Dr. Reynolds' office had become painfully familiar to Tallulah over the past months. Today, at 20 weeks pregnant, she sat with both hands resting on her prominently rounded belly, feeling the occasional flutter of movement beneath her palms. "Triplets, huh?" Tallulah looked up to find an elderly woman smiling at her from across the room. "Yes," she replied, returning the smile with practiced ease. "My sister had twins back in '73, the woman continued. "Hardest thing she ever did, but worth every sleepless night." The nurse called Tallulah's name before she could respond. The examination proceeded with measurements, heartbeat checks, and the increasingly clear ultrasound images of her 3 babies. "Everything looks good," Dr. Reynolds said, wiping the gel from Tallulah's stomach. "But I'm concerned about your stress levels. That blood pressure isn't alarming yet, but with triplets, we can't be too careful. Are you getting enough rest?" Tallulah thought of her 3 jobs and the exhaustion that seemed permanent now. "I'm trying," she said, the lie sitting uncomfortably. After scheduling her next appointment, Tallulah headed for the hospital pharmacy. As she waited in line, her gaze drifted to a rack of magazines nearby. One glossy publication stood out, a society magazine featuring the elite of the city. And there, on the cover, was a face that stopped her heart mid-beat. Vesper Calix, immaculate in a tuxedo, his arm around a stunningly beautiful woman in a designer gown. The headline read, "Power couple Vesper and Ariella Calix make rare public appearance at charity gala." Tallulah's legs nearly buckled beneath her. With trembling hands, she reached for the magazine, flipping to the indicated page. The article mentioned their 5-year marriage and Ariella's work as a philanthropist. 5-year marriage. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. 5 years. Not recently married, not separated or divorcing. Married for 5 years, which meant that every moment he had spent with her had been a lie. She managed to pay for her vitamins and found her way to a bench in the hospital garden. There, with the magazine still clutched in her grip, she allowed the full impact of the betrayal to wash over her. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her babies, one hand pressed against her swollen belly. I'm so sorry, I didn't know that I believed him so easily. The image of Ariella Calix returned to her mind, willowy, elegant, draped in diamonds that probably cost more than Tallulah would earn in a decade. The perfect match for a man like Vesper, not a hotel maid with second-hand clothes and desperate dreams. For a brief moment, Tallulah considered trying to contact him again, not to beg for help, but to confront him with his lies. But what would that accomplish, beyond creating drama that might hurt his innocent wife? Ariella Calix hadn't asked for her husband to stray. And what of her children? Did she want them born into conflict where they were living proof of a father's infidelity? No, they deserved better than that. She deserved better. With newfound resolve, Tallulah stood, tossed the magazine into a trash bin, and straightened her shoulders. She would stop trying to contact Vesper. She would raise these children on her own, with dignity and love, and they would never know that their father had been a liar who had broken their mother's heart before they were even born. The decision brought a strange sense of peace. The path forward would be harder without Vesper's resources, but it would be hers to determine. That evening, in her small apartment, Tallulah began a ritual that would sustain her through the remaining months of her pregnancy. Sitting cross-legged on her bed, she spoke to her children about her dreams for them, her plans, her love that grew stronger each day. "You will be kind," she told them softly, hands cradling her abdomen. "You will be honest. You will know that your worth isn't determined by money or status. You will be loved, so completely loved, every day of your lives." As if in response, a series of flutters rippled across her belly, 3 distinct movements, as though each child was acknowledging her promises. The weeks that followed brought new challenges as Tallulah's body expanded to accommodate her growing triplets. Working became increasingly difficult, and Dr. Reynolds grew more insistent about reduced hours and eventual bed rest. But her baby's health had to come first. She began scaling back her hours at the hotel, focusing instead on the design work she could do from home, sitting with her feet elevated as instructed. It was during this period that Tallulah allowed herself to truly prepare for her children's arrival, not just practically, but emotionally. She transformed her tiny living space to accommodate 3 cribs and the mountain of supplies 3 infants would require. The second-hand furniture, the hand-me-down clothes, the carefully researched but budget-friendly supplies, each item was selected with love. Each corner of her apartment adapted with careful thought. At night, when insomnia kept her awake, Tallulah would sometimes allow her thoughts to drift to Vesper. Not with longing now, but with a kind of distant wonder at how someone could have seemed so genuine while being so fundamentally false. Had any of it been real? Had he felt anything true for her during their brief time together? These questions had no answers, and increasingly, Tallulah found she no longer needed them. The truth of Vesper's deception was enough. The magazine image of him with his wife had shattered any remaining illusions. Whatever they had shared had been built on lies, and no foundation that false could support the weight of 3 new lives. Her pregnancy progressed to the 7th month. Tallulah's focus narrowed to 2 primary goals: staying healthy enough to carry her babies as close to full term as possible, and preparing for their arrival with the limited resources at her disposal. The nursery corner of her apartment slowly filled with essentials, many gifted by concerned co-workers who had organized a surprise baby shower. "We've got your back," her supervisor at the hotel had told her, pressing a card filled with cash into her hand. "These babies are going to have a whole hotel full of honorary aunts and uncles looking out for them." The unexpected kindness had brought Tallulah to tears. Perhaps she wasn't as alone as she had feared. Perhaps she and her children would find their way forward without Vesper Calix and his wealth, building a different kind of family from the community that had rallied around her. That night, as she added the shower gifts to her careful inventory, of baby supplies, Tallulah made a decision. She would stop looking back at what might have been. She would stop wondering about Vesper, stop imagining confrontations or reconciliations or explanations. Her future and her children's future lay ahead, not behind. With one hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling the movements of the 3 lives that had become her entire world, Tallulah whispered a final goodbye to the man who had both broken her heart and given her the greatest gifts she would ever receive. "We'll be fine without him," she promised her unborn children. "We'll be more than fine." What she couldn't know was how soon that promise would be tested, or that the man she was determined to forget was about to walk back into her life in the most unexpected way imaginable. Chapter 5. Unexpected Reunion. 7 months pregnant with triplets, Tallulah Cosima could no longer hide her condition beneath flowing tops or strategically draped scarves. Her belly preceded her everywhere, drawing looks of astonishment and concern in equal measure. Today's hospital visit was yet another in the increasingly frequent checkups Dr. Reynolds insisted upon. "Your blood pressure is still elevated," the doctor noted, frowning at the reading. "And there's more protein in your urine than I'd like to see. We need to monitor you for preeclampsia." Tallulah nodded, having researched the condition extensively after an earlier warning. "What does that mean for today?" "I want you to go to the lab for some additional blood work and then come back here in 2 days rather than next week." Dr. Reynolds' expression softened. "I know it's a lot, especially with your work schedule, but the babies come first." Tallulah finished for her. "I understand." After scheduling her follow-up appointment, Tallulah made her way to the hospital's laboratory, one hand supporting her lower back as she walked. The triplets seemed particularly active today, their movements more pronounced than usual, as though they were having their own private party within the increasingly cramped space of her womb. "Easy in there," she murmured, pausing to catch her breath near a bank of elevators. Mama needs her organs intact. The lab was bustling with the mid-morning rush, and Tallulah resigned herself to a long wait. Finding an empty seat against the wall, she lowered herself carefully, adjusting her position to alleviate the pressure on her bladder. She had just closed her eyes, seeking a moment's respite from the persistent fatigue that dogged her days, when the elevator doors nearby slid open. "Just need to check these results before the board meeting," a familiar voice was saying. "It won't take more than 15 minutes. Tallulah's eyes flew open, her heart lurching painfully against her ribs. That voice, a voice that had whispered endearments against her skin, that had promised to return to her, that had haunted her dreams for months. Vesper Calix stepped from the elevator, immaculate in a charcoal suit that seemed molded to his powerful frame. His attention was focused on the man beside him, an older doctor in a white coat, as they discussed something in low, urgent tones. For one wild moment, Tallulah considered fleeing, but her ungainly body betrayed her. By the time she had struggled to her feet, Vesper had turned, his gaze sweeping the waiting area and landing on her with the impact of a physical blow. The recognition was immediate. His eyes widened, his lips parting in surprise as he took in her face. But then his gaze dropped lower to the unmistakable evidence of her pregnancy, and all color drained from his features. Tallulah stood frozen, one hand instinctively cradling her belly as though to shield her unborn children from the shock of this moment. Around them, the busy lab continued its normal rhythm, oblivious to the electric tension that had suddenly charged the air. Vesper said something to the doctor beside him, who nodded and continued on his way. Then, with deliberate steps that carried him across what felt like an unbridgeable chasm, Vesper approached her. "Tallulah," he said, her name a breath rather than a word. His eyes hadn't left her stomach, the stunned disbelief in them shifting to something more complex. "You're pregnant," The banality of the observation might have made her laugh under different circumstances. Instead, it ignited the anger she had thought safely banked beneath months of rationalization and acceptance. "How perceptive of you," she replied, her voice low but sharp. "If you'll excuse me, I have an appointment." She attempted to move past him, but he reached for her arm, his touch gentle but insistent. "Tallulah, wait, please." Something in his tone, a rawness she had never heard before, made her pause. Around them, curious glances were being cast their way, and the last thing Tallulah wanted was to create a scene in the very hospital where she received her medical care. 5 minutes, she conceded. "There's a garden courtyard on this floor." Without waiting for his response, she made her way to the small outdoor space she had discovered during one of her many visits. Designed as a healing garden for patients and their families, it was usually peaceful, with benches nestled among carefully tended plants. Today, it was empty, but for an elderly patient dozing in the far corner, an IV pole beside him. Tallulah chose a bench partially screened by a trellis of climbing roses, lowering herself onto it with relief. Her ankles were already swelling, another symptom Dr. Reynolds monitored with growing concern. Vesper followed, his confident stride now hesitant. As he approached, he didn't sit, instead standing before her with an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his posture. "Is it mine?" he asked finally, the question emerging rough and unpolished. Tallulah looked up at him, allowing the full weight of her contempt to show in her expression. "No, Vesper. After you left, I immediately slept with several other men. Of course it's yours." He flinched at her sarcasm but didn't retreat. "When? How far along are you?" 7 months. Do the math." His eyes widened again as the calculation clicked into place. "From our last night together." "Nights, plural," she corrected. "And it's triplets, by the way. Congratulations. You're going to be a father 3 times over." The news hit him visibly, his knees seeming to buckle as he finally sank onto the bench beside her, leaving careful space between them. "Triplets," he repeated, the word barely audible. 3 babies. Yes, 3 separate human beings who will enter this world in approximately 2 months, with or without their father's acknowledgement. Tallulah's hand moved protectively over her belly. "Though I suppose I should say their father's wife's acknowledgement, since that's who would need to accept them, isn't it?" Confusion flickered across Vesper's face. "My wife? What are you talking about?" "Please don't insult my intelligence further," Tallulah snapped. "I saw the magazine, Vesper. You and Ariella Calix married 5 years, the power couple of the city's elite. Did you think I would never find out? That I would just be your little secret on the side forever?" Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by something that looked startlingly like relief. "Tallulah, it's not what you think, isn't it? You're not married to Ariella Calix, the woman you attended the Children's Hospital Gala with 3 months ago?" "I am married to her, yes, but—" "Then it's exactly what I think," Tallulah cut him off, rising with as much dignity as her unwieldy body would allow. "I don't need your explanations or your excuses, Vesper. I've made my peace with doing this alone." She turned to leave, but his next words stopped her cold. "It's a marriage in name only. It has been for years." Tallulah turned back slowly, wary of another deception. "What does that mean?" Vesper ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of frustration she remembered from their brief time together. "Sit down, please. You shouldn't be standing so long, in your condition." Though she bristled at his presumption, Tallulah's aching back made the suggestion too sensible to refuse. She returned to the bench, maintaining the distance between them. "Ariella and I were married by arrangement, not choice," Vesper began, his voice low and intent. "Our families have business interests that aligned, and the marriage was part of securing those interests." From the beginning, it was understood that it was a partnership, not a love match. Tallulah's skepticism must have shown on her face, because he continued more urgently. We live separate lives, Tallulah. Separate homes, separate bedrooms when we must stay in the same place for appearances. The night I met you, I was in the middle of negotiating the terms of our divorce. When I had to leave so suddenly, it was because complications had arisen. Her father had discovered our plans and was threatening to block the dissolution. The explanation was either the truth or the most elaborate lie she had ever heard. Tallulah searched Vesper's face, looking for signs of deception, but found only earnest intensity. You expect me to believe that in the 3 months we were together, you never thought to mention you had a wife. I thought it would confuse the issue, make things more complicated than they needed to be. The marriage was effectively over. I was just waiting for the legal confirmation. He reached for her hand, but Tallulah pulled it away. I should have told you. That was wrong of me, and I'm sorry. His apology, though seemingly genuine, didn't address the larger issue. And after you left, you promised to contact me within a month, Vesper. It's been 7 months. At this, genuine anguish crossed his features. I tried, Tallulah. God knows I tried. When I arrived overseas, Ariella's family confronted me. They had hired investigators who discovered our relationship. They confiscated my phone, claiming security concerns about family business. When I finally got a replacement weeks later, I had lost all my contacts, including your number. I called the hotel dozens of times, but they claimed you no longer worked there and refused to provide any information. I left messages for you there, Tallulah countered, though doubt was beginning to creep into her certainty. Multiple times over months. I never received a single one. He pulled out his phone, showing her his call history. Look, calls to the hotel at least twice weekly for months. The manager, Garrett. He stopped abruptly, realization dawning. He's Ariella's cousin. He must have intercepted your messages and blocked my inquiries about you. Vesper ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. They isolated me completely, changed my email passwords, monitored my communications. It was like being held prisoner while fighting the divorce proceedings. I even hired a private investigator to find you, but you'd moved apartments by then. The manager? Why would he do that? Because he's Ariella's cousin. He was probably instructed to monitor my activities. Vesper's expression darkened. I should have known her family would have eyes everywhere. The explanation was almost too neat, too convenient, and yet it aligned with certain facts Tallulah couldn't deny. The hotel's reluctance to pass on her messages, the mysterious dead ends she had encountered in every attempt to contact him. As if sensing her wavering certainty, Vesper leaned closer, his amber eyes intense. Tallulah, I swear to you, I never intended to disappear from your life. What we had, what we found together, was real. More real than anything I'd experienced before. A tiny flutter beneath her palm reminded Tallulah of what was at stake. Not just her heart, which had already been broken and imperfectly mended, but the future of her children. Their children. Even if what you're saying is true, she said slowly, it doesn't change the fact that I'm 7 months pregnant with triplets and you're still legally married to another woman. The divorce is proceeding, Vesper replied. Ariella's family finally accepted the inevitable when they realized neither of us would change our minds. It should be finalized within weeks. Before Tallulah could respond, a particularly strong kick from one of the babies made her wince and shift position. Immediately, Vesper's attention was drawn to her rounded belly, a mixture of wonder and concern replacing the intensity in his eyes. May I? He asked hesitantly, one hand hovering in the space between them. The request was so unexpected, so intimate, that Tallulah found herself nodding before she could think better of it. With gentle reverence, Vesper placed his hand on the curve of her stomach, just as one of the triplets delivered another powerful kick. His sharp intake of breath was audible, his eyes widening as he felt the movement beneath his palm. That's our baby," he said, voice hushed with awe. "One of them," Tallulah corrected, her own voice softer than she intended. "They're pretty active these days." As if on cue, a second movement rippled across her belly, this one from a different position. Vesper's hand followed instinctively, his touch warm through the thin fabric of her maternity dress. "Incredible," he murmured. Then, to her astonishment, he slid from the bench to kneel before her, both hands now cradling her belly with a tenderness that made her throat constrict. "Hello in there," he said, addressing her stomach directly. "I'm your father. I'm sorry I've been away, but I'm here now." The simple declaration, spoken with such raw emotion, shattered something in Tallulah's carefully constructed defenses. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could blink them back. Vesper looked up, alarmed by her sudden tears. "Tallulah, what's wrong? Are you in pain?" She shook her head, unable to articulate the complex tangle of emotions his presence had unleashed. Relief that he hadn't deliberately abandoned her. Anger that he had kept his marriage secret, regardless of its nature. Fear of believing him again, of being hurt again. And beneath it all, a treacherous hope that perhaps, against all odds, they might find a way forward together. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted, wiping at her tears. "I've spent months coming to terms with raising these children alone. I've made plans, arrangements. I've built a life that doesn't include you." "I understand," Vesper said, rising to sit beside her again. "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but please, Tallulah, give me a chance to be part of our children's lives, to support you, in whatever way you'll allow." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, but Tallulah had been burned before by pretty words and earnest promises. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This is a lot to process." Vesper nodded, reaching into his jacket to produce a business card. "My direct number," he explained, pressing it into her hand. "Call me anytime, day or night, for anything you need." His fingers lingered against hers, a touch that sent familiar electricity through her despite her resolve. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "I never stopped thinking about you, Tallulah, not for a single day." Before she could respond, he was on his feet, moving away with obvious reluctance. At the entrance to the garden, he paused, looking back at her with an expression that combined hope and fear in equal measure. "I'll wait for your call," he said simply. Then he was gone, leaving Tallulah alone with the card in her hand and the echo of his words in her heart. She sat motionless for several minutes, one hand absently stroking her belly as the triplets settled back into relative quiet. The encounter had left her drained, confused, uncertain of the path forward. Was Vesper telling the truth about his marriage, about his attempts to contact her? Was she risking more heartbreak by allowing him back into her life, into her children's lives? Or was the greater risk in keeping him away, denying her babies their father when he seemed genuinely eager to be part of their world? As she finally rose to make her way to the lab for her blood work, Tallulah slipped Vesper's card into her purse. She didn't have answers yet, but for the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't entirely alone, where the father of her children might stand beside her, supporting both her and the new lives they had created together. It was a dangerous hope, perhaps, but as her babies moved within her, Tallulah knew she owed it to them to explore every possibility for their future, even if that meant risking her own heart once more. Chapter 6. Fragile Trust. 3 days passed before Tallulah called the number. On Vesper's card, 3 days of internal debate, of weighing risks against possibilities, of trying to separate emotion from practicality. When she finally dialed, her hand trembled slightly, heart racing as she waited through 2 rings. "Tallulah," His voice, when he answered, held no surprise, only relief and something warmer that made her pulse quicken, despite her resolve to remain detached. "We need to talk," she said simply. "About the babies, about arrangements." They met at a quiet cafe near her apartment, neutral territory where she felt less vulnerable than she would have in her small, personal space. Vesper was already waiting when she arrived, rising immediately at the sight of her. His eyes went first to her face, then to her pronounced belly, his expression softening with an awe that seemed impossible to fake. "You look beautiful," he said. Quietly, as she lowered herself into the chair across from him, Tallulah brushed aside the compliment. "I've been thinking about what you said, about your marriage, about the divorce." She met his gaze directly. "I want to believe you, Vesper, but trust doesn't come easily anymore." "I understand." He placed a folder on the table between them. "That's why I brought these." Inside were legal documents, divorce papers in progress, emails dating back to before they'd met, discussing the dissolution of his marriage, a separate residence deed in his name alone. Evidence that supported his story of a marriage existing only on paper, one that had been ending even before he met her. "You didn't have to show me these," Tallulah said, closing the folder after scanning enough to confirm his claims. "Yes, I did." His amber eyes held hers, intense and sincere. "I need you to know that what we shared was real, Tallulah. That I never intended to deceive you about anything that mattered. The distinction, anything that mattered, wasn't lost. On her, his marriage in his mind hadn't mattered because it was already over emotionally, already ending legally. That omission still stung, but less sharply now that she understood its context. "Where do we go from here?" she asked, resting one hand on her belly where one of the triplets was performing what felt like somersaults. "That's up to you," Vesper replied. "But I'd like to be involved. In your pregnancy, in our children's lives, in whatever capacity you'll allow." His deference to her wishes, so different from the confident man who had swept into her life and changed it forever, softened something in Tallulah's guarded heart. Perhaps people could change. Perhaps second chances were sometimes deserved. "Need help?" she admitted finally. "The doctor wants me on reduced activity. With triplets, there are risks." She trailed off, uncomfortable with appearing vulnerable despite the reality of her situation. "Tell me what you need." Vesper leaned forward, earnest and attentive. "Anything." What followed was a practical conversation about her tiny apartment, unsuitable for 3 infants, about her dwindling savings, about the medical concerns Dr. Reynolds monitored with increasing vigilance. Vesper listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled with each revelation. "Move in with me," he said when she finished. Seeing her immediate wariness, he quickly added, "Not like that. I have a house, plenty of room, a garden. You'd have your own space, complete privacy. I just want you and our children to be safe, comfortable." The offer was tempting. More than tempting, it was the solution to problems that had kept Tallulah awake night after night. But it would mean dependence, vulnerability, proximity to a man who still affected her more powerfully than she cared. "And to admit, I don't know," she began, but Vesper gently cut her off. "Just look at it," he suggested. "If you hate it, we'll find another solution. But please, Tallulah, let me help. These are my children too." The simple truth of his statement, these were his children, tipped the scales. Whatever had happened between them, whatever hurt lingered, their triplets deserved every advantage they could provide, including a father who wanted to be present. 2 days later, Tallulah stood in the sunlit living room of Vesper's house, trying not to appear as overwhelmed as she felt. The space was stunning, tastefully designed with warm woods and comfortable furnishings, large windows overlooking a private garden, absolutely nothing like the sterile mansion she had imagined a man of his wealth would inhabit. "This would be your suite," Vesper said, leading her into a ground-floor wing with its own sitting room, bedroom and bathroom. I've had an interior designer draw up some nursery plans, but they're just suggestions. You'd have complete control over how the space is arranged. Tallulah ran her hand along a sun-warmed windowsill, imagining mornings here with her babies, imagining a life where space and beauty were givens rather than luxuries. It was another world from her cramped apartment with its constant traffic, noise and temperamental plumbing. "Why are you doing this?" she asked abruptly, turning to face him. "And don't say it's just because they're your children. There are easier ways to provide financial support." Vesper considered her for a long moment, his expression unguarded in a way she remembered from their earliest days together. "Because I still care about you, Tallulah, because I never stopped, and because I want the chance to show you that what happened between us wasn't just a fling for me." The honesty of his answer, the vulnerability it revealed, threatened to crack the protective shell she had built around her heart. But beneath that shell lay fear. Fear of being hurt again, of believing again only to be disappointed. "I can't make any promises," she said finally. "I'll move in for the baby's sake. But us, that's a different matter entirely." "I understand." Vesper's smile held both acceptance and a hint of determination. No pressure, no expectations, just the chance to help, to be involved. A week later, Tallulah's meager possessions were moved into the house, her apartment subleased to a grateful colleague. The transition was both easier and harder than she had anticipated. Easier practically, harder emotionally. Living with Vesper, seeing him daily, navigating this new dimension of their relationship required a delicate balance she wasn't always sure she could maintain. But as the days passed, a tentative routine emerged. Vesper left early for work, returning in the evenings to ask about her doctor's appointments, to help assemble nursery furniture, to simply sit in companionable silence as they both read in the garden during the cooler evening hours. His presence was constant but unobtrusive, supportive without being smothering. Despite her determination to keep emotional distance, Tallulah found herself watching him when he wasn't aware. The concentrated focus as he studied baby furniture, assembly instructions, the gentleness with which he prepared meals that accommodated her pregnancy-induced aversions, the way his face lit up when she shared ultrasound images of their growing babies. One evening in her 8th month, they sat on the porch swing as sunset painted the garden in gold. The gentle rocking motion had become one of Tallulah's favorite ways to ease the persistent ache in her lower back. Vesper sat beside her, a careful distance maintained between them as always. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her rounded abdomen. Over the past weeks, he had occasionally felt the baby's move, but always with her explicit permission. Tallulah nodded, lifting her loose tunic to expose her stretched skin. Vesper's warm hand settled gently on the curve of her belly, waiting patiently. For a moment, nothing happened, and then, as if responding to their father's touch, all 3 babies seemed to move at once, a rippling wave of elbows and knees, and tiny feet, Vesper's sharp intake of breath, the wonder that transformed his features, the reverent way his fingers traced the movements beneath her skin. All of it pierced Tallulah's practiced detachment. This man, whatever his past mistakes, loved their unborn children with a depth that couldn't be pretended. "They know you," she said softly. "They're always more active when you're around." His eyes met hers, amber depths filled with emotion too complex to name. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting me be part of this, even after everything." The sincerity in his voice, the humility that had replaced his former confidence, touched something vulnerable within her. For a brief, unguarded moment, Tallulah allowed herself to remember how it had felt to be held by him, to be cherished by him, to believe in the possibility of them. When his gaze dropped to her lips, the air between them charged with familiar electricity. She knew he was remembering too. He leaned forward slightly, hesitant, giving her every opportunity to pull away. The moment hovered, suspended in the golden evening light, a crossroads where one path led back toward the passion they had once shared, the other toward the safer distance she had maintained since moving in. Just as Vesper's lips nearly brushed hers, one of the triplets delivered a particularly enthusiastic kick directly where his hand rested. The unexpected movement startled them both, breaking the moment, as Tallulah shifted position with a small gasp. "Someone has your sense of timing," she said wryly, smoothing her tunic back over her belly with hands that trembled slightly. Vesper laughed, the sound warm in the gathering twilight, but his eyes still held questions she wasn't ready to answer. With gentle care, he helped her to her feet as darkness settled over the garden. "Good night, Tallulah," he said softly at her door, his restraint evident in the careful space he maintained between them. "Sleep well." Alone in her room, Tallulah pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks, her heart beating an erratic rhythm that had nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with the man whose roof she now shared. She had almost kissed him, wanted to kiss him, despite all her resolutions to keep their relationship strictly practical for their children's sake. The realization was both unsettling and exhilarating. As she prepared for bed, movement slow, with the increasing awkwardness of her changing body, Tallulah acknowledged a truth she had been avoiding. She was in danger of falling for Vesper Calix all over again. Not the idealized version from their whirlwind romance, but this new Vesper, patient, considerate, willing to earn back trust rather than assuming it as his due. The thought terrified her. She had rebuilt herself after his disappearance, had found strength in her independence, had prepared to face single motherhood with determination, if not confidence. Opening herself to him again meant risking that hard-won self-sufficiency, risking another heartbreak that would be all the more devastating for the children who would now be caught in its aftermath. And yet, as she drifted toward sleep, Tallulah couldn't help wondering if perhaps the greater risk lay in refusing to trust at all, in denying herself and their children the chance at the family they could become if she found the courage to believe in him once more. Chapter 7. New life, new beginning. Something's wrong. Tallulah's voice broke the pre-dawn silence, pulling Vesper instantly from sleep. He found her standing in his bedroom doorway, one hand braced against the frame, the other cradling her enormous belly. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear. The babies. He was already on his feet, crossing the room to her. Contractions. Too early. She grimaced as another wave of pain tightened across her abdomen. Only 32 weeks, it's too soon. Dr. Reynolds had warned them of this possibility. Multiple pregnancies rarely went full term, and with triplets, early labor was a near certainty. Still, they had hoped for at least another 2 weeks, time for the baby's lungs to develop more fully, for Tallulah's body to prepare. "I've called an ambulance," she continued, her breathing labored. "My water broke." The next hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. The ambulance ride with Tallulah's hand clutching his so tightly his fingers went numb. The emergency room, triage, where medical staff swarmed around them with efficient urgency. The terrifying moment when monitors showed one baby's heart rate dropping, prompting Dr. Reynolds to order an immediate C-section. "You can stay with her," the doctor told Vesper as they prepared Tallulah for surgery, "but only if you can remain calm. She needs strength now, not panic." Vesper nodded, swallowing his fear as he donned the sterile gown and mask provided. When he entered the operating room, Tallulah's eyes sought his immediately, wide and frightened. Above the surgical drape that separated her upper body from the procedure about to take place. "I'm scared," she whispered as he took the seat beside her head. "I know." He took her hand, pressing it between both of his. "But you're not alone. I'm right here." We'll meet our babies together. The surgery proceeded with controlled urgency, medical staff communicating in the clipped, precise language of professionals facing a critical situation. Though screened from viewing the actual procedure, Vesper could sense the tension in the room, could hear the concern in Dr. Reynolds' voice as she worked. Then, cutting through the tension, a sound that stopped his heart. A tiny, indignant cry, high-pitched and wavering, but unmistakably alive. "Baby A is out," Dr. Reynolds announced. "Little girl, good color." Seconds later, a second cry joined the first. "Baby B," another girl, smaller but breathing well on her own. Tallulah's grip on Vesper's hand tightened painfully as they waited for the third cry. The silence stretched, each second an eternity, until finally a weaker, more tentative wail reached their ears. "Baby C, a boy. He'll need some assistance with breathing, but his vitals are strong." Relief crashed through Vesper with such force he felt momentarily lightheaded. 3 babies, 3 tiny lives, all breathing, all fighting. He looked down to share the moment with Tallulah, only to find her eyes closed, her face alarmingly pale. "Blood pressure dropping," a nurse called out. "She's hemorrhaging." The next moments were nightmarish, Vesper being hustled from the room as additional medical personnel rushed in, the babies already whisked away to the NICU, Tallulah lying still and pale on the operating table with alarming amounts of blood visible. In the empty hallway, Vesper slid down the wall to sit on the cold floor, his head in his hands. The possibility of losing Tallulah, of raising their children without her, opened a void of terror he had never experienced. Despite all his wealth, his connections, his power in the business world, he was utterly helpless here, unable to do anything but wait and pray to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. "Mr. Calix," a nurse found him there an indeterminate time later. "Your partner is stable. We've controlled the bleeding, but she'll need close monitoring." "And the babies?" "In the NICU. Your son is on a ventilator as a precaution, but he's fighting hard. The girls are doing better than expected for their gestational age." Relief weakened his knees as he stood. "Can I see them? Any of them?" The nurse nodded, leading him first to the recovery room where Tallulah lay unconscious, tubes and monitors attached to her still form. He approached cautiously, heart constricting at how small and vulnerable she looked. This fierce, independent woman who had carried their 3 children against all odds. "I love you," he whispered, pressing his lips to her forehead. "Please, don't leave us." From there, the nurse escorted him to the NICU, where 3 incubators contained the tiniest humans Vesper had ever seen. His daughters, impossibly small but perfect, with delicate features that already showed echoes of Tallulah's beauty. His son, smaller still, a ventilator helping his underdeveloped lungs, but with a determined furrow to his brow that spoke of his will to survive. "You can touch them," the NICU nurse encouraged, showing him how to place his hands through the incubator ports. "They need to know you're here." With trembling fingers, Vesper reached for his son first, the most fragile, the one fighting hardest. The baby's entire hand barely spanned the width of his finger, but the grip was surprisingly strong for something so tiny. "Hello, little fighter," he murmured. "Your mom and I are waiting for you. Stay strong." To his daughters, he made similar promises, marveling at their perfectly formed features, the whisper-soft hair that crowned their heads, the determined way they squirmed against the confines of their temporary homes. Hours passed as Vesper moved between the NICU and Tallulah's room, unwilling to leave any of them for long. When Tallulah finally stirred, her first confused question sent fresh waves of love coursing through him. "The babies, are they alive? Beautiful, perfect," he assured her, tears blurring his vision. "2 girls and a boy, just as we hoped." The days that followed were both the most terrifying and most beautiful of Vesper's life. Tallulah's recovery was slower than expected, complicated by anemia from the blood loss during delivery. The triplets, now officially named Aurora, Zephyr, and Phoenix, fought their own battles in the NICU, their tiny bodies struggling to perform functions they would have developed further in the womb. Phoenix, their son, faced the greatest challenges. Twice his ventilator settings had to be increased, and once, terrifyingly, he stopped breathing altogether, requiring emergency intervention. Each crisis aged Vesper made him understand the visceral, primal terror of potentially losing a child. "He has your stubbornness," Tallulah told him on the 5th day, when they received news that Phoenix had finally been stabilized enough to attempt breathing without assistance. Too determined to give up. She had been wheeled to the NICU beside Vesper, still too weak to walk unassisted, but unwilling to remain separated from her babies any longer. The comment, the first hint of their old easy banter, gave Vesper hope that they might find their way back to each other through this shared trial. By the end of the 2nd week in the NICU, small miracles had accumulated. Phoenix, though still the most fragile at just over 3 pounds, breathed on his own for short periods, his tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that brought tears to Vesper's eyes every time he witnessed it. Aurora and Zephyr, the stronger girls from the beginning at nearly 4 pounds each, were now permitted brief periods out of their incubators, cradled against their parents' bare chests in the kangaroo care the nurses insisted was as vital as any medical intervention. The girls might be ready to go home in about 4 weeks if they continue this progress, Dr. Reynolds explained during rounds. Phoenix will likely need another 2 weeks beyond that. We're looking at approximately 6 weeks total NICU stay if all continues well. The first time Tallulah held Aurora against her skin, the tiny girl nestled in the valley between her breasts. Vesper thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. Silent tears tracked down Tallulah's cheeks as her daughter snuggled closer, instinctively seeking her mother's warmth. "She knows me," Tallulah whispered, wonder breaking through the exhaustion that had marked her features since the birth. "Of course she does," Vesper replied softly. "You're her mother, the voice she's heard for 9 months, the heart that beat alongside hers." When it was Vesper's turn to hold Zephyr, he was surprised by the depth of emotion that overwhelmed him. This tiny creature, barely 5 pounds of fragile humanity, had reshaped his entire universe simply by existing. As she slept against his chest, her miniature hand splayed over his heart, Vesper made silent promises to protect her, to cherish her, to be worthy of the gift she represented. On the 18th day, Phoenix was finally strong enough for his first kangaroo session. The NICU nurse placed him carefully on Vesper's bare chest, the baby's weight almost negligible, his skin still translucent enough to show the blue veins beneath. "Support his head," the nurse instructed. "He's still learning to control his movements." For a breathless moment, Vesper feared he would do something wrong, would somehow hurt this fragile being entrusted to his care. Then Phoenix sighed, a tiny exhalation that seemed to express contentment, and settled against him as though recognizing safety and belonging. "He knows you too," Tallulah observed from her wheelchair beside them, her voice soft with emotion. "Already trusts you completely." Their eyes met over their son's downy head, and in that moment, something profound passed between them. An understanding deeper than words, a bond forged through shared fear and shared joy, and the miracle of these 3 lives they had created together. As the triplets continued to grow stronger, Tallulah and Vesper established new patterns, taking turns at the NICU, supporting each other through setbacks, celebrating each tiny milestone together. The nursery at home was finished, but empty, waiting for the day all 3 babies would be strong enough to leave the hospital. "We need to talk about names," Tallulah said one evening as they sat beside the incubators watching their children sleep. I've been calling them baby A, B, and C in my head for so long, they need real identities. The conversation that followed was their most natural, since Vesper had returned to her life. Easy, collaborative, filled with the shared language of two people connected by something profound. When they settled on Aurora, Zephyr, and Phoenix, the names seemed perfect, strong yet beautiful, unique without being strange. Aurora for the dawn she represents in our lives, Vesper suggested. Zephyr for the gentle breeze that changed our course. And Phoenix for rising from the ashes, Tallulah finished, her eyes on their son who had fought hardest to survive. A new beginning from what seemed like an ending. The metaphor hung between them, charged with meaning that extended beyond their tiny son, to encompass what might be possible for them as well. A new beginning from what had once seemed irreparably broken. On the day Phoenix finally joined his sisters in breathing unassisted, Vesper found Tallulah sitting between the three incubators, one hand extended into each through the access ports, physically connecting all three of her children at once. Her eyes were closed, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "What's wrong?" he asked softly, kneeling beside her chair. She shook her head, not in negation, but as though words were insufficient. "Nothing's wrong," she whispered finally. "For the first time, everything feels right, complete." Her eyes opened, meeting his with a vulnerability she had rarely allowed him to see. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being here, for not giving up on them or on me." The gratitude in her voice, the openness in her expression, cracked something in Vesper's careful restraint. Before he could second-guess himself, he leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "There was never any other choice," he murmured. "You and these children, you're everything, Tallulah, everything that matters." For a heartbeat, they remained like that, connected by touch and shared emotion, and the three tiny lives that had bound them together more permanently than any vows could have done. Then, hesitantly, Tallulah's hand found his, their fingers intertwining as naturally as they had during those golden days when they had first fallen in love. It wasn't a declaration, or a promise, not yet. But as they sat together, surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors, tracking their children's steady progress, it felt like a beginning, fragile and tentative as the newborns themselves, but full of possibility and hope for what might grow from these difficult but sacred days. Chapter 8. Family Interference. They're coming home tomorrow. Tallulah's voice trembled with emotion as she hung up the phone. After 6 weeks in the NICU, their triplets had finally been cleared for discharge, all three reaching the critical 5-pound threshold, all breathing independently. Vesper looked up from the bassinet he was assembling, his face lighting with joy. All of them, even Phoenix. All of them, she confirmed, a radiant smile transforming her tired features. In the weeks since the triplets' birth, something had shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. The shared vigils in the NICU, the hushed consultations with doctors, the collective holding of breath during each setback had formed a bond different from their initial passionate connection, but perhaps deeper. "The nursery's nearly ready," Vesper told her, surveying the room transformed into a haven for 3 new lives. Soft yellow walls provided a backdrop for hand-painted clouds. 3 identical cribs stood in a semicircle, each with its own monitoring system. Tallulah moved to stand beside him. "It's perfect," she murmured. "Better than I ever could have imagined for them." The following day brought a whirlwind of activity, final discharge paperwork, last-minute instructions from nurses, the nerve-wracking process of securing 3 tiny bodies into their car seats, bringing them into the house, Aurora and Zephyr cradled in Tallulah's arms. Phoenix in Vesper's felt momentous, as though crossing the threshold marked their official beginning as a family. "They're really here," Tallulah whispered, gazing down at their sleeping children. "They're really ours." The peace of that moment, however, proved short-lived. The doorbell rang just after 4 p.m., startling Phoenix into frightened wails. As Tallulah moved to soothe him, Vesper went to answer the door, irritation already forming into words of dismissal. The words died in his throat as he opened the door to find 4 people standing on his porch. His parents, his younger sister, and Ariella, his not-quite ex-wife. "Surprise," his mother said, her brittle smile not reaching her eyes. "We heard our grandchildren were coming home today." Vesper stood frozen, horror washing through him. This moment, this confrontation, was inevitable, but he had hoped to control its timing, to prepare Tallulah. "Now isn't a good time," he began, but his father, patriarch of the Calyx Empire, brushed past him into the foyer. "We've given you plenty of time to sort out this situation," Augustus Calyx said, his disapproval evident. "It's time we met the children who bear our name." "They don't, actually," Vesper countered. "They have Tallulah's surname until we decide otherwise." His mother's gasp of outrage was cut short as Tallulah appeared in the hallway, Phoenix cradled against her shoulder. She had changed since the birth, her body softer but with a maternal confidence that lent her a new kind of beauty. "You must be Vesper's family," Tallulah said, her voice calm despite the tension visible in her posture. "I'm Tallulah Cosima, the triplets' mother." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken judgments. Vesper moved to stand beside Tallulah. One hand resting lightly at the small of her back in silent support, Ariella stepped forward first, surprising everyone. Though still legally Vesper's wife, there was no hostility in her expression, only curiosity and something that looked almost like relief. "He's beautiful," she said, genuine warmth in her voice. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Tallulah carefully transferred Phoenix into Ariella's waiting arms, a gesture requiring trust that moved Vesper deeply. "I should explain," Ariella said softly, her eyes on the baby rather than the tense adults. "Vesper and I were never in love. Our marriage was arranged to merge family businesses. I've spent years fighting for my own freedom, just as he has." She glanced up, meeting Tallulah's gaze directly. "Finding you gave him the courage to finally break away. For that alone, I owe you my gratitude." The sincerity in her voice was impossible to fake. Tallulah realized with sudden clarity that Ariella had been as much a prisoner of family expectations as Vesper, not an adversary, but a potential ally. Left alone with his parents, Vesper felt anger building. "You should have called first," he said quietly. "This is exactly the kind of stress Tallulah doesn't need right now. That woman has upended your entire life, embarrassed our family publicly," his father retorted. "And you're worried about causing her stress?" "She nearly died bringing our children into the world," Vesper replied evenly. "Children who have spent 6 weeks fighting for their lives. So yes, her well-being comes before your family reputation." The fragile peace was shattered when Augustus. He cornered Tallulah later in the kitchen. "Name your price," he said bluntly. "To disappear with the children, to free Vesper from this entanglement." Tallulah's stunned silence was broken by Vesper's arrival, his face darkening with fury as he understood what was happening. "Get out," he told his father, voice low and dangerous. "All of you, now." "Don't be foolish," his mother pleaded. "Think of your position, your future." "Ariella has agreed to overlook this indiscretion." "This indiscretion is my family," Vesper interrupted. "Tallulah and our children are my family now. If you can't accept that, then we have nothing more to discuss." After they left, Tallulah stood shaking in the nursery, watching the sleeping triplets with tears streaming down her face. "I should take them and go," she whispered when Vesper found her. "They deserve better than to be caught in this." The words sent ice through Vesper's veins. "Please don't," he said, his voice breaking. "Tallulah, don't let them separate us, not when we've just found our way back to each other." "How can this work?" she asked, gesturing helplessly. "Your world, their world, it's so different from mine. They'll never accept me or our children. Then we'll build our own world," he promised, taking her hand. "One where only we decide what matters." The rain that had threatened all day finally broke, pounding against the windows as they stood facing each other at a crossroads, stay and fight for their unconventional family, or retreat to safer, separate lives. Thunder crashed outside as Vesper closed the distance between them, his hands gently framing her face. "I love you," he said simply. "I have since that first night. That hasn't changed, it's only grown deeper." When his lips met hers, it was like coming home after a long, difficult journey. The kiss deepened, years of longing and months of careful distance dissolving in the heat of reconnection. They moved to her bedroom, hands rediscovering each other's. Bodies, now changed but still achingly familiar. Their lovemaking was different than before, gentler, more deliberate, with an awareness of all they had endured to reach this moment. As they lay entwined afterward, the storm still raging outside, Tallulah traced patterns on his chest, her expression thoughtful. "I'm not making any promises," she said quietly. "Not yet. There's still too much to figure out." Vesper understood. She meant more than his family's opposition. She meant trust, rebuilt slowly and still fragile. She meant finding her independence within their relationship. She meant ensuring their children would never be pawns in a family power struggle. "One day at a time," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But together." As if in answer, the baby monitor lit up with Phoenix's hungry cries, bringing them back to the immediate reality of their new life. Together they rose to tend to their son, united in purpose, if not yet fully in heart. What neither could know was that the confrontation with Vesper's family had only just begun, and that the greatest challenge to their fragile reunion still awaited them. Chapter 9. Sacrifices and choices. Dawn filtered through the nursery blinds, painting stripes of gold across 3 sleeping infants. Tallulah sat in the rocking chair, exhausted but content after the 4 a.m. feeding. 2 weeks had passed since the triplets had come home, 2 weeks of sleepless nights and triumphant milestones, of learning to function as a team with Vesper in this new reality they shared. 2 weeks since that stormy night when they had found their way back to each other's arms. The sound of Vesper's footsteps in the hallway made her smile. He appeared in the doorway, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, his hair tousled from sleep. "They're all down," he whispered, offering her the steaming cup. "For now," she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Phoenix needed an extra burping session, but they should sleep for at least another hour. Vesper sat on the ottoman at her feet, his free hand resting lightly on her knee. The casual touch, the ease between them, still felt new and precious, a hard-won intimacy built not just on their rekindled passion, but on shared purpose and growing trust. "I've been thinking," he began, his expression turning serious, "about my family, about their reaction to us." Tallulah tensed slightly, though Vesper had staunchly defended her and the babies during that disastrous first meeting. His family's rejection still stung, not for herself, but for her children who deserved grandparents' love. "I want to legally change the triplets' names," he continued. "Add Calix as a middle name at least. Make them officially part of both our families." The gesture, his acknowledgement of their children as his heirs despite his parents' disapproval, touched Tallulah deeply. "Are you sure? Your father was quite clear about his feelings." "My father doesn't dictate my choices anymore," Vesper replied, a new certainty in his voice. "Our children deserve their full heritage from both sides." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the doorbell, an unexpected sound that had both of them exchanging worried glances. The last unexpected visitor had been Vesper's family, and that encounter still left a bitter taste. "I'll get it," Vesper said, rising reluctantly. "You stay with the babies." Tallulah listened to his footsteps receding down the hall, straining to hear voices at the door. When he didn't immediately return, curiosity and concern propelled her to the hallway, where she found him in intense conversation with a woman she didn't recognize. Elegant, middle-aged, with an air of refined authority. "Tallulah," Vesper called, spotting her. "This is Victoria Mercer, my family's attorney." The woman turned, assessing Tallulah with shrewd eyes that missed nothing, from her sleep-deprived appearance to her protective stance. "Ms. Cosima," she acknowledged with a crisp nod. "I was hoping to speak with you both." "About what?" Tallulah asked, wariness evident in her tone. "A proposition from the Calix family," Victoria replied, removing an envelope from her leather portfolio. "One I believe you should consider carefully." Vesper led them to the living room, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. Victoria took a seat on the sofa, arranging herself with practiced precision before opening her portfolio. "I'll be direct," she began. "Augustus and Cordelia Calix are prepared to offer you financial security, Ms. Cosima, a very generous settlement, and ongoing support for the children," Tallulah frowned. "In exchange for what? Your discretion, of course, and—" Victoria paused, glancing briefly at Vesper. "Your agreement to raise the children independently, allowing Mr. Calix to return to his proper position within the family structure?" The meaning was clear. Take the money and disappear, allowing Vesper to rejoin his family's world without the complications of an unsuitable partner and unplanned children. "Get out," Vesper said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now." Victoria seemed unsurprised by his reaction. "The offer isn't for you, Mr. Calix," she clarified. "Your parents understand you feel obligated. This gives Ms. Cosima the option to make her own choice, without pressure from either side." She placed the envelope on the coffee table, rising smoothly. "All the details are inside. The financial terms, the provisions for the children's education, healthcare, everything they could need. I suggest you review it carefully, Ms. Cosima. Think of what this could provide for your children." When she had gone, Tallulah stared at the envelope as though it might burst into flames. "You should see what they're offering," she said finally, her voice strangely hollow. "I don't care what's in there," Vesper replied, reaching for her hand. "Nothing they could offer is worth losing you and our family." But Tallulah pulled away, unable to meet his eyes. "That's easy for you to say. You've never had to worry about whether you could provide for your children's future." The truth of her words hung between them. Despite their reconciliation, despite the love growing between them again, they came from different worlds. Vesper had never known true financial insecurity. Tallulah had never known anything else. "Just let me think," she said, rising as Aurora's cries echoed through the baby monitor. "This isn't a simple decision." For the next 24 hours, they moved around each other carefully, tending to the babies together, but with a new distance between them. Tallulah had read the offer, staggeringly generous, enough to secure her children's futures in ways she had never imagined possible. The triplets would want for nothing: the best education, healthcare, opportunities that her own modest means could never provide. The price, of course, was Vesper, the man she had fallen for twice now, against her better judgment each time. The father who had proven himself devoted to their children from the moment he had learned of their existence. As night fell, Tallulah sat in the garden, the envelope in her lap, watching as Vesper moved through the nursery routine, visible through the window. His gentleness with their tiny daughters, his patience with Phoenix's fussiness, the obvious love in every interaction. These were things no amount of money could replace. When he joined her later, settling beside her on the garden bench, she felt his careful distance, the space he was giving her to make this impossible choice. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about what would be best for you and the triplets." "Have you?" Tallulah asked, her heart constricting at his tone. Vesper nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars emerging above them. "If you want to accept their offer, I understand. I won't fight you on it." Tallulah turned to him in shock. "You'd let us go, just like that." "Not just like that," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "It would destroy me. But if you believe they'd have a better life with the security my parents are offering, without the complications of our relationship," he swallowed hard, "then I'd step aside. Their well-being and yours matter more than what I want." The realization hit her with stunning clarity. This man, who had hurt her deeply once through circumstances beyond his control, was now willing to sacrifice his own happiness for what he thought might be best for her and their children. There was no deeper proof of love than that. "That's not what I want," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "Not even close." Relief washed over his features, quickly followed by determination. "Then we'll face my family together. We'll make our own way on our own terms." "It won't be easy," Tallulah warned, thinking of the wealth and influence aligned against them. "Your family has resources we can't match." She paused, gathering courage to speak the words she'd held back for months. "I was so afraid to trust you again, Vesper. When I discovered you were married, when I thought you'd abandoned me, it broke something inside me. I convinced myself I could never let you back in." Her fingers tightened around his. "But watching you these past months, with our children, with me standing against your family, I've seen who you truly are. The man I fell in love with that first night wasn't an illusion. He was real. You are real." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I've been falling in love with you all over again, day by day. And this time, my eyes are wide open. I see all of you, your flaws, your struggles, your strength. This time, my love isn't blind passion. It's a choice I'm making with my whole heart." Vesper's eyes shone with emotion as he drew her into his arms. "I don't deserve this second chance," he whispered against her hair, "but I swear I'll spend every day earning it." "They have money," Vesper agreed, "but we have something more valuable." He glanced toward the nursery where their children slept. "We have love, for each other, for our family. That's worth fighting for." The following morning, Victoria Mercer returned as expected for Tallulah's answer. She seemed unsurprised to find both Tallulah and Vesper waiting, the envelope unsealed, on the table between them. "We have a counter-proposal," Tallulah stated, her voice steady. "The Calix family can be part of our children's lives as loving grandparents who respect their parents' relationship, or they can stay away entirely. Those are the only options on the table." Victoria's eyebrow rose marginally. "That's quite a gamble, Ms. Cosima. The financial security being offered isn't worth the price," Tallulah interrupted. "My children deserve their father's presence more than they need their grandparents' money." As Victoria departed with their message, Vesper pulled Tallulah into his arms, holding her with a fierceness that expressed everything words could not. "Whatever happens next," he promised against her hair, "we'll face it together." What neither of them anticipated was Augustus Calix's personal appearance at their door the very next day. The family patriarch stood alone on their porch, his imperious bearing somewhat diminished by the uncertainty in his eyes. "I'd like to see my grandchildren," he said simply, "if you'll permit it." It was the closest thing to humility Vesper had ever heard from his father, and the first time Augustus had referred to the triplets as his grandchildren without qualification or disdain. The visit that followed was stilted, awkward, but marked by a moment Tallulah would never forget. Augustus Calix, titan of industry and arbiter of social standing, gazing down at tiny Phoenix with unmistakable wonder as the baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. "He has the Calix determination," the older man remarked, something like pride in his voice, "and his mother's courage," Vesper added pointedly. When Augustus finally departed, he paused at the door, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "Your mother, she'd like to visit, if that would be acceptable." It wasn't a full concession, wasn't an embrace of their unconventional family, but it was a beginning, a crack in the wall of opposition that had seemed so impenetrable just days before. That night, as they lay in bed with the triplets finally sleeping peacefully down the hall, Tallulah curled against Vesper's side, her head resting on his chest, where she could hear the steady rhythm of his heart. "Today was unexpected," she murmured. "My father rarely admits defeat," Vesper replied, his fingers tracing patterns along her spine. He recognized a stronger will than his own. Tallulah smiled against his skin. "We make a good team." "The best," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for not giving up on us, on me." As sleep claimed them both, Tallulah realized they had crossed a threshold, not just in dealing with Vesper's family, but in their own relationship. The wounds of the past hadn't vanished, but they had begun to heal, strengthened rather than weakened by the challenges they had faced together. The path ahead wasn't clear or easy, but for the first time, she believed they could walk it side by side, building something lasting and true from the complicated circumstances that had brought them together. Chapter 10. Love Prevails. The triplets sleep peacefully in their nursery as Tallulah stands on the balcony, watching the sunrise. It's been 3 months since the confrontation with Vesper's family. 3 months of gradual acceptance and tentative relationship building. Today is the day they'll learn if their bold stand for love has cost them everything or won them acceptance. "They're coming here today," Vesper says, wrapping his arms around her waist. "My parents, Ariella, they want to talk." Fear and hope battle within Tallulah as she turns in his arms. "Whatever happens, we have each other. We have our children. Ours." Later, tension fills their living room as Vesper's parents sit stiffly on the sofa, their discomfort evident. Augustus Calix hasn't softened entirely. His posture remains rigid, his expression guarded. "We've come to a decision," he announces formally. "While we still have reservations about how this situation came to be, we cannot deny the reality of our grandchildren." Cordelia Calix speaks up, her voice softer than her husband's. "Losing connection with our son isn't a price we're willing to pay for our pride." When Phoenix begins to fuss in his bassinet, no one moves faster than Augustus, surprising everyone as he carefully lifts the tiny boy. His practiced movements reveal he's been reading about handling premature infants. "He has Vesper's eyes," the older man murmurs, a crack appearing in his stern facade. As tiny Aurora reaches up from her bassinet, her hand wrapping around his finger, something profound shifts in his expression. "Perhaps," he says, voice rough with reluctant emotion, "there are different kinds of suitable marriages than what we envisioned. It's not a complete surrender, not full acceptance, but it's the beginning of a bridge across what once seemed an impassable divide." Ariella steps forward, presenting their signed divorce papers. "I've moved on as well," she admits, showing a small engagement ring, "with someone I actually chose." Her genuine smile as she wishes them happiness speaks volumes about her relief at escaping the arranged marriage. As the mood in the room gradually warms from frigid to merely cool, Vesper leads Tallulah to the garden for a private moment. Under the afternoon sun, he kneels before her, presenting not just a ring, but his whole heart. "Our love story began with a chance meeting, survived impossible odds, and stands here victorious," he says, voice trembling with emotion. "Marry me, Tallulah Cosima. Not tomorrow or someday, but today. Right now in this garden with our children and both our families as witnesses." Tears stream down Tallulah's face as she pulls him to his feet. "Yes," she whispers against his lips, "1,000 times yes." That evening, after a spontaneous garden ceremony filled with tears and laughter after their families have departed and the children are sound asleep, Vesper leads Tallulah to their bedroom. Rose petals create a path to their bed where candles flicker and cast dancing shadows. "We've never had a proper wedding night," he whispers, his eyes never leaving hers as he slowly unzips her dress. Tallulah's body trembles beneath his touch, all the emotion of their journey together heightening. "Every sensation, I never stopped wanting you," she confesses,